Okay, so today is lesson 7. It's our second class on authentication. Last week we looked at authentication and authorization with ASP.NET Identity, where we had a local store of users in our SQL Server database. Today we're going to do a couple of things. So please be sure you log into D2L. And jump into the week 7 folder. So we've gone over assignment 2. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about SSL and how it gets implemented in a .NET Core application. We're going to look at the process of implementing a third-party login provider, and then we're going to go ahead and do it. And we're going to do this in two phases. First, we're going to implement Google Authentication in our beer store together, and then once we've done that, we're going to use the breakout rooms in WebEx, and if you're doing the class asynchronously, or if you leave at 4 o'clock, we're not finished today, you can do it on your own. But we're going to also implement Microsoft login. So the Google will do collectively, and the Microsoft you're going to do in groups in class, and hopefully we should be able to finish that in class today. So if we'd be remiss to talk about web application security and not really address SSL. So there's an brief activity for you here in the week 7 folder, down in the middle. It says, what do you already know about SSL? So this is a little shared whiteboard. So if you go to padlet.com/auth/login, click this link here in the first item. Log in. You can log in with your Google account. You can use your Lakehead credentials to log in. And then once you've logged in, you can visit this second link, which is My Padlet. And the question here is, what do you know about SSL? And you should add your name as well. If you log in, it should add your name. But if not, if your name isn't included, please add it to the sticky. So you can just click the plus sign down at the bottom. And this will open up a sticky note. Will, I think you're on mute.
Hello?
Hi, I could see you were speaking, but we couldn't hear you. Can you repeat that?
I wasn't trying to speak.
Oh, okay. So share what you know about SSL. Yep, secure sockets layer. Don't forget to add your name to your sticky as well. This might be a common question for a web developer co-op job, web designer, a junior web designer or developer, an entry-level position in an interview. Tell me what SSL is and how it relates to web development. Okay, so yeah, Mitch and Bente. So SSL, they're involved. They're issued in individual certificates. That's right, Mitch. Bente, yep, it is around making secure connections. Does anybody know why we use them or see them commonly in web development? So yes, Stella, it's around protecting communication over networks. Yep, it ensures integrity and confidentiality. No problem. All spelling is forgiven in the chat. That goes without saying. That keeps data being sent between two systems safe and secure, unmodifiable and unreadable. True. This note here encrypts all data. This is an important one. Cole hit on one of the key features of SSL. In HTTP, by default, through the HTTP protocol, all traffic is sent in plain text. So any data that comes, any response that comes from a web server to a client browser, or any data submitted from the browser to a server, such as Mitchell suggested, for example, credit cards, by default, all that traffic is sent in plain text. So the idea of an SSL certificate is it will encrypt that traffic. So any data passed back and forth is encrypted. Now, as Leo mentioned, it is kind of an older protocol. So at some point it may be replaced, but it's still today considered standard practice when we're doing web development. And Ryan, you're right. Yep. So it's establishing a secure connection between the browser and the server using a certificate. All right, that's a pretty good list. Oauth, yes, it's true. It helps prevent it. It doesn't necessarily completely prevent it. Okay. Yes, typically, Leo, I understand what you mean. However, when we go to buy the certificates, they're still referred to as SSL certificates. I don't think we actually have the option to buy a TLS certificate. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but we'll look at a couple certificate issuers. And in terms of how they sell them and market them for websites, right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. So yes, when I'm talking about SSL certificates, you're right that they are using the TLS protocol, but they're still typically marketed as SSL certificates. So we'll look at that. Okay, so those are some good answers. Got it. Okay, so that is an important point, and I'm glad you made that on the board. That's good to know, Leo. Um, okay, so what does this look like? How do you get an SSL certificate? Um, so there's a couple reasons why. Really, actually, we'll come back to how you get them in a minute. Um, there's a couple reasons why SSL is critical. We actually should have SSL certificates on any website we publish, even if there's no sensitive information on it. There's no credit cards, there's no logins. Even if it's just an HTML and CSS only, a static website, there's still a couple of good reasons why we should use SSL. Does anybody know why we need SSL, even when we have a site with no security concerns? Okay, yep. There's actually a couple of non-security reasons as well why every website needs a certificate now. And when I refer to an SSL certificate, yes, it could be using the TLS protocol. So there's a couple reasons. The first reason, so there's a link, I've put this link here, the SEO and SSL. Starting back as far back as 2015, Google started including SSL as a factor in its search engine results. So a site with an SSL certificate running under SSL would be ranked more highly than a site without one. So if you want your site to be found, even if there's really nothing there in terms of security concerns, so this is a good article that kind of describes some of that. The other reason to use SSL is that your browsers also prefer sites that use SSL. So I can see here in the Georgian intranet, in Chrome, I can see my site is secure. If I want to view information about the certificate, it says my certificate is valid. I can see the details of the certificate, who issued it, the digital signature, for example, that it's a valid certificate. But if I load a site that doesn't have one, this is just a blog I'm writing for a class I'm taking, you'll notice my browser marks it as not secure. And the reason for this is my site is running under plain HTTP. It's not running under HTTPS for secured. So the browser is going to mark any site you build as not secure if there's no SSL certificate along with it. So that's probably going to hurt traffic as well if users are getting messages that our sites are not secure, even if there really is no sensitive data on there. We never want to have Chrome or Firefox or another browser mark our site as not secure. So for all of these reasons, SSL is crucial. So we've got a few options. Has anybody ever set an SSL certificate up before on a website? Okay, so Leo, you've done it before. And where did you get your certificate from? So it's probably this one. Your free service. The most popular one is called Let's Encrypt, right? So some hosting companies offer Let's Encrypt. It's a free renewable. I think they renew every 90 days. So some hosting companies support Let's Encrypt. So for example, these guys where I host a lot of sites, If I go into one of my domains, so if I want to turn on Let's Encrypt, I just have a button here where I can enable or disable it. And that gives me a free SSL certificate. Let's Encrypt is not available on all hosts. One of the biggest hosts are these guys. So GoDaddy, if you host a website here, they don't support Let's Encrypt. So if you want an SSL certificate here, so GoDaddy their certificates start for the low price of $85 a year. Okay? So you can't use a free certificate if you're hosting your site here. The other place that I go if I'm hosting a website and Let's Encrypt is not an option, another option that I use are these guys. They offer various levels of SSL certificates. Starting for as low as, these are US dollar prices, $5 a year. That's their base certificate. And then they have more advanced ones. These have higher levels of warranty. They cover multiple domains, etc. So you would need to buy a certificate from a company, an issuer like Namecheap, and then you would need your hosting company to generate a certificate request, which you bring here and you bundle it together to get your certificate. Ultimately, the SSL certificate might look something like this once you buy it and download it. And then you'd have to upload it to the web server and have your server administrator install it. So I get a bunch of certificate files. Here's what one actually looks like under the hood. This is the actual certificate itself, or to one of the files. So I would need to buy this certificate, download it to my computer, upload it to my web server, and then ask the hosting company to install the certificate on the domain. So the certificates are not portable from one host to another. If you move a website from one hosting company to another hosting company, you're going to have to buy a new SSL certificate. Okay. So something to think about whenever you are publishing a site, that one way or another, Let's Encrypt is the easiest, but your site, no matter what it is, it should be running under SSL. Okay, so I want to move into, anybody have any questions about SSL? Actually, before we move on to social authentication with .NET. So I'm going to give you a quick preview of where we're going today. So this is our application we're building in my Monday class. So when I go to my login screen, in our beer store, there's some text here saying there are no external services provided. Because I've enabled Google Sign-In and configured it, in this project, I get a Google button here instead. If I click it, it brings up the name of my application, brings up a number of Google accounts. I'm already signed in to a Google account, so I'll just click on it. And now I'm signed in with my Google email. I'm not an administrator, so I don't see the categories and products lists, but I am authenticated in the site. So we're going to do this together. And there's a number of steps. We don't have to write a lot of code, but there's quite a bit of setup that we need to do. We're going to do this one together. And then I'm going to put you in groups and have you try to also implement Microsoft Sign-In in your beer store as well. So I'm going to kind of just give you a high-level overview of how this all works, and then we'll get going. So we are going to need to go to the Google Developer Console. We're going to need to set up a set of API keys. We'll need a credential. And then I've put in a link here as well for how you would do that for Microsoft. So what we're doing, it's based on this tutorial link. So if you want to read the external provider's full tutorial, the link is here. I've put the link directly on D2L. This slide deck is also on D2L in the Lesson 7 folder. So shortly, we're going to go to the Developer Console in Google. We're going to create a new project. We're going to configure the consent screen. We're going to allow any external Google account. It doesn't have to be, for example, just a Lakehead email. Any Google email will suffice. We have to give our consent screen a name. So that appears at the top of that login window that Google will present our users. Then we've got to generate an OAuth client. And when we do that, we're going to have to provide a name, as well as we need the redirect URIs. And so we're going to do this today in our beer store. You're also going to need to do this in your assignment. And we need to enable the URL/sign in Google for both our local site as well as our Azure domain, because we want to be able to use Google sign in both when we're working locally and when we publish our site to Azure. When we're done, the Google console will give us a set of API keys. It'll give us a client ID and a client secret, and we're going to need both of these values to get included in our project. So once we're done setting things up in the Google panel, we have a couple of ways we can add the keys to our project. First, we're going to do the quick and dirty way, which is putting them in app settings.json. We'll try it this way to get it running. Once we get it running, we want to store them more securely. So locally in the Windows Key Vault or Secret Vault, and then on Azure in the Azure configuration section. So we'll do it quick and dirty first, and then we'll modify it to the more secure version after. For your assignment, you should be using the Key Vault and Azure configuration. We're then going to add a bit of code in Startup that adds Google Authentication and reads these keys either from appsettings.json or from our secret key store. We're also going to install a NuGet package, Microsoft ASP.NET Core .authentication.google. Once we're done, that'll give us the Google button and allow us to sign in with the Google account. Now, these accounts are not stored in the ASP.NET users table. Instead, they're stored in a separate table, ASP.NET user logins, where it will track a key from the provider as well as the provider name. So these users are stored separate from the users that register directly on our own website. So this is what we want to implement. So let's open up our beer store application and get it running. So I'm going to start my site without debugging. And by default, our login page says there are no external services configured. Same on the register page, and a user, they can use either one to sign in with their Google account. They don't have to first register and then log in. It's just one process. So I want to start going through this process. So the first place we're going to go, I'll put this link in the chat. We're going to go to the Google Developer Console. And in here, we're going to create a new project. So on this first screen, we have to give our project a name. So create a new project in the Google API Center. You can call it whatever you like. Name of the project doesn't really matter. So once my project gets created, I've got a link that says select project. So I'm just going to click on it. And it takes me here. Then in the middle, I'm going to click this link that says Go to APIs Overview. And that'll bring me to this screen and say, it'll tell us we don't have any APIs available yet. That's fine. So our next step is to configure the consent screen. So I'm going to click on this Oauth Consent screen over here. And I want to choose external. So if we pick internal, it's basically an intranet. Only users within our domain can authenticate. We want this to be public. Any Google user can sign up. So make sure you choose external here and click create. We've got this consent screen. We're only going to add one thing here, and that will be our application name. And this text here, it'll appear at the top of the Google sign-in window. So just put in a name for your application here. The whole rest of the screen, I'm going to leave it all blank. I don't want to include a logo or anything else. Don't fill out any of the other values. Just the application name, and click the Save button at the bottom when you're done. So it will show me the name. It says verification is not required and my user type is external. Our next step is going to be to create an OAuth client.
Rich?
Yep.
Quick question. Just Base is asking if for the assignment, they're able to upload a logo.
You shouldn't, no, do not upload a logo here. If you upload a logo, it's going to require you to verify the domain, which will be a problem because we don't own the domain that we're using. Microsoft owns it. So no, do not upload a logo.
Okay. Thanks.
Hey, Rich.
Yep.
My OAuth consent screen is different from yours. It's asking me for a user support email as well.
Do you want to share for a second, Ryan, and we can look at it?
Yeah, sure. News. Oh, there it is.
We only see your desktop.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry
there
about
you
that.
go. Okay. Oh, user support email. Okay. It defaults. So just put in the email associated with your Google. So just any Google email, Google account email.
Okay. Not that one.
Yeah, because it's whatever Google account you're signed in as. So that's fine. You can use that account. So just click that from the drop down. That's
Okay.
fine. Yep, and give it a name. Yeah, mine defaulted to the email with my Google account.
Okay.
And yeah, just put in your own email here as well. Let's try that. Okay, looks okay.
All right, cool. Stop sharing now.
Okay, and again, all the screenshots of the process, all these slides, they are on D2L for you to reference. And I am recording this as well. So I've configured my consent screen, I've picked external, and I've added only my application name. And if your email was blank like Ryan's, you just need to pick the email associated with your Google account. So now I'm going to go to the credentials screen, create credentials, and create an OAuth client ID. So we'll go to credentials. There are no credentials here. I'm going to click the create button. And I'm going to choose OAuth client ID. It requests user consent so our app can access the user data. This is what we want. So pick OAuth client ID. And from the drop-down list, under application type, we want the first option, which is web application. Once we pick web application, we get a form opening up with a few other values that we're going to need to supply. So the first value is just a name for the client. So I'll just call it beer store client. The name is not particularly important. It defaults to web client 1. You can even leave it at web client 1. Doesn't really matter. What is really important is this section down here, the authorized redirect URIs. So this is where we tell Google, once you authenticate a user, this is where to send them back to. So we want to provide two different URLs here. One is our local domain, and the second one is our live Azure domain. So for your beer store, just going to go back to my beer store homepage for a minute. And I'm going to copy the URL to my clipboard, including the port number. So copy the link to your homepage. And I'm going to click the Add URI button. I'm going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to add on this suffix, signin-Google. So we're going to be adding a Google library to Visual Studio. And this is the URL that's going to process those users when they come back from Google. So I'm going to hit enter. I'll put this, whoops, I don't want this yet. So I'll go back in. I'll put this in the chat. and the X's have got to be your port number. So your port is going to be 443. Mine runs at 44342. Everyone in the class is going to have a different port number. They're all starting with 443 because that's the local SSL port. I also want to add my Azure domain with this same URL suffix, signin-google. So I'm going to go to my Azure portal and grab the URL of my site on Azure. If you haven't published your beer store to Azure, you don't need to do this step. But for your assignment, you will need your Azure domain. So I'm going to go to the portal. I've got a web application here I can use. I've got this My Test Store. So I'm going to copy the URL of my Azure domain, and I'm going to add it here as well. So this way my Google app can redirect users both locally when I'm developing in Visual Studio and on my live site. And each of them is suffixed with /signin-google. So then I'm going to save that change. If I go back and edit it, I can see both my URIs here. So you'll need to do this process for your assignment. For today, for your beer store, you definitely need the local URI. Up to you if you use the Azure URI or not. And then up in the right, I can now see my set of API keys. We've got a client ID and we've got a client secret. If we want to change the secret, which is like the password, we could reset it and that'll generate a new secret. So that's the setup we need in the Google console. We configured the consent screen, we created a project, configured the consent screen, created a web OAuth client, and added in both the local and Azure URIs to signin-google. And when we saved it, we get a set of keys that we can use. So that's all the work we need to do in the Google panel. And now we need to start configuring our ASP.NET application to work with Google, to use those keys and to include some code to do this. So first, we'll put these keys in our app settings.json. So open up that file, and later we'll use the secret key vault. So I'm going to add here a comma on my second last line, and I'm going to create a section for my Google keys. Whoops, sorry. I'll create a section called Authentication. So first I'm going to create an authentication section, and then inside it, I'm going to create a Google section. And inside my Google section, I want to create two keys, one for client ID and one for client secret. So I'll paste this in the chat. These are now the bottom lines of our file. So previously, we just had allowed hosts and a closing curly bracket. So everything I'm highlighting in blue, this is all new. Excuse me. So now I need to put in my key values from the Google console. So I'm going to go back to my Google console. I'm going to copy the client ID and paste it in here. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my secret. So we'll save this. And we're going to need to install the Google Auth NuGet package. And then we're going to need to add some code to our startup file that says when our application runs to enable Google authentication using these keys. Once we have that running on our login screen, this message is going to be hidden, and we're going to have a working Google button here instead. Okay, it's 2:52. I think we're about due to take a break here. So it shouldn't take us too long when we come back. We're going to get this working. And then I'm also going to show you this key vault, both the local Windows key vault, secret vault, as well as the Azure configuration section. So it shouldn't take us too long to finish Google authentication, and then you guys can try on your own to implement Microsoft. Let's take a break for about 10 minutes here.